A low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed through the cramped classroom, cutting through the stale odor of old textbooks and dusty chalk. It was late afternoon on a Thursday, and most of the students had slumped into their desks, their attention already drifted toward the soft glow of the hallway. The teacher perched at the front, elbow resting on a stack of ungraded papers, scanning the rows of scribbled notes and half-filled exercise books. On the walls, peeling posters proclaimed algebra formulas and rules of grammar, their colors muted by years of sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Rashida sat at the very back, her chair pushed slightly to one side, her notebook open wide but filled only with quick sketches, abstract spirals, a pair of gloved fists, the faint outline of a champion's profile. She tapped her pencil against the desk, each sharp click resonating through the quiet room like a metronome marking a slow, uncertain heartbeat. The muffled thud of boots on the linoleum corridor floor echoed as footsteps approached and then retreated, the secretary shuffling outside, unaware of the scene unfolding at the open door. Who can tell me what their parents do for work? The teacher's voice cracked against the dull overhead lights. A few raised hands flickered across the room. Accountant, bus driver, postal clerk. Familiar answers that prevented any real surprise. When it was her turn, Rashida paused, pressed her lips together, and then spoke in a low voice, so soft that at first the teacher bent forward in curiosity to catch her words. My father. He's a trainer. A pause, long enough that the entire class leaned forward as if drawn to a secret. Then the teacher straightened, exhaled as though dispelling a thought, and chuckled, a sound that rippled awkwardly across the rows of desks. Laughter broke out among her classmates, half-hearted and unsure, like children discovering a joke they don't quite understand. Rashida flushed, color rising in her cheeks, but she did not look away. Instead, she folded her arms on the desk and dropped her chin to her knuckles, measuring the distance between herself and the smirks flickering across the room. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, a startling jolt that made pins rattle. The class stood as one, chairs scraping against tile, and began to spill into the corridor. The teacher grabbed a chalk-smeared jacket off his chair and followed, still shaking his head. As desks cleared, Rashida remained seated for a heartbeat longer, sliding her sketches into the cover of her notebook before slipping it into her backpack. She rose and crossed to the door, the evening light painting long shadows behind her. A soft knock sounded against the wood, softer than the bell, drawing her gaze down the hallway. The secretary peered through the window panel, face pale, and motioned silently. A tall figure in a long, rumpled coat stood just beyond the glass, hands tucked into worn pockets. A single phrase drifted down in a hushed tone, carrying across the polished floor and parking lot beyond. I must speak with your father. In that instant, the school's familiar confines seemed to stretch and contract all at once, as though every corridor, every locker room bench held its breath, waiting for the answer that would shatter the normal rhythm of fourth-grade Thursdays. Rashida's heart hammered in her chest, not with fear of punishment but with the weight of the unknown he had brought into her world. She squared her shoulders, picked up her bag, and stepped forward, the echo of her footsteps marking the first beats of a story that would change everything. The corridor beyond the classroom door felt narrower than memory allowed, the linoleum tiles worn smooth by decades of backpacks and scuffed shoes. Fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered once, then steadied, bathing the hallway in that same jaundiced glow. Rashida paused at the threshold, her fingers curled around the strap of her satchel, watching the stranger step forward. He walked with a quiet confidence, shoulders squared beneath a threadbare overcoat, the collar turned up against a chill that seeped through the school's aging walls. As he approached, the secretary, still perched at her glassed-in desk, leaned forward, pressing her mouth to the receiver before whispering into the handset. Outside, a faint rumble of traffic drifted in through the open window, punctuated by the intermittent squeal of brakes and the murmur of distant voices. Rashida's breath caught when the man finally came to rest a few feet from her, and for a moment, the proper order of teacher and pupil, of authority and child, hung suspended between them. He cleared his throat, a low, measured sound that echoed just enough to demand attention without announcing itself. "Your father," he began, voice rich with years lived beyond these walls. "Does he still come here?" Rashida felt her pulse settle into a heavier rhythm, each beat striking her chest like a drum. She unfolded her hands, dropped the strap, and turned her boots toward his eyes. "He used to," she said quietly, testing the words on her tongue. "He said this place taught him more than any gym ever could." The man offered no immediate reply. Instead, he glanced down the hallway toward the left, where lockers lined the far wall and a cluster of students wandered in loose formation, their laughter muted by distance. Then his gaze returned to Rashida. There was no pity there, no judgment, only a slow, curious intensity, as if he were searching her face for some remnant of the child her father had once been. A school bell clanged somewhere deep within the labyrinth of corridors, sending a ripple through the day's end, but the hallway remained still. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim in deference to the space between them. Without a word, the man reached into his coat and withdrew a plain envelope, yellowed at the edges as though carried long. He held it out, palm up. "I have your father's words. He told me to give this to you if ever I found him." Rashida blinked. She recognized that handwriting, even from a distance. The precise loops of her father's signature, the way the letters tilted slightly to the right. She swallowed, and her throat felt impossibly dry. Her fingers brushed the paper as she took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected, weighted by something more than folded pages. On the back, scrawled in ink still vivid, were 3 simple words: "Find me, daughter." A tremor ran through her hand. The man, David Renshaw, stepped forward, voice lowering to a near whisper. "He's unwell," he said. "He didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." His gaze flicked to Rashida's school emblem on her satchel, then back to her face. "You need to see him soon." She forced herself to breathe, her mind racing through memories of her father's proud stride into this very building, his laughter echoing in the gym, the way he'd taught her her first footwork. The image flickered and fractured, mixed with a new fear that settled like stones in her stomach. "How do you know where he is?" she managed, voice ragged. Renshaw lifted his chin, revealing a flash of gray at his temples. "He's at Mercy Hospital, room 412. I watched him every morning for weeks. He'd hoped to keep you from worrying until the right moment." He paused. "He wants you by his side." The overhead lights flickered again, as though the school itself were hesitating at the gravity of the moment. A janitor's cart squeaked up the hall, scattering grains of dust into the slanted light, but neither Rashida nor Renshaw seemed to notice. The secretary, now silent on the phone, leaned forward, her eyes wide behind thick glasses. Rashida pressed the envelope to her chest, feeling its edges press against her heart. The weight of her father's request grounded her in a way that her textbooks and lessons never had. She looked up at Renshaw and for the first time saw not a stranger, but someone who had known her father at a turning point, someone who carried the echo of his kindness from those old boxing days. "I'll go," she said at last, voice steady despite the knot of fear and resolve coiling within her. "Thank you." As she turned to walk away, Renshaw's hand brushed her shoulder, not like a grip, but a gentle support, and Rashida realized that this journey would force her to step into a world far beyond the edges of her sketches, into the beating heart of the man who had taught her the first lessons of strength and silence. The corridor light hummed back to full brightness, and Rashida resumed her steps, the envelope clutched tightly in one hand, the other swinging free. Behind her, the distant clang of a classroom door closing marked the end of one chapter and the urgent beginning of another. He stepped back into the corridor, the envelope clasped in Rashida's tight fist, and guided her toward the exit. The glass double doors wheezed open, admitting a shaft of late afternoon sun that lit the dusty particles dancing in the stale school air. Rashida followed, her shoes echoing on cracked terrazzo tiles, each step reverberating like a drumbeat, counting down to whatever waited beyond these walls. Outside, the September sky wore a bruised lavender hue. The brick facade of East End School stood stoic against the gathering shadows. Cars ambled down the street, engines throbbing softly. A distant siren rose and fell, incidental yet ominous. Renshaw led her past a row of aging light poles, their painted surfaces chipped to reveal the steel beneath. The wind carried the faint tang of exhaust mingled with fallen leaves curling along the gutter. They reached a pale blue Chevy Impala, its chrome trim dull with dust and pitted by years of Ohio road salt. Renshaw opened the passenger door without a word. Rashida slipped inside, feeling the vinyl seat stick to her legs as she sat. He circled around, settled behind the wheel, and swung the car into motion. The tires hissed over the asphalt as they turned onto Greenwood Avenue, the engine's rumble low and measured. In the rearview mirror, Rashida caught her own reflection. Eyes wide, skin pale, the envelope tucked against her heart like an amulet. Renshaw glanced at her once, sharp and solemn, before turning his gaze back to the road. For a long stretch they drove in silent communion, the radio, tuned to a scratchy AM station, broadcasting wartime ballads that warped through the speakers. Occasionally, a trumpet solo cut through the static, then faded into the hum of tires. She watched the neighborhood blur past. Small brick bungalows with overgrown hedges, post-war ranch houses clad in peeling aluminum siding, children kicking a tattered soccer ball in unkempt yards. Each scene felt like a piece of a puzzle she had never known she possessed, a community woven together by hopes, debts, and compromises. Renshaw turned onto Wallace Street, the road narrowing as they approached Mercy Hospital. A red neon cross flickered atop the emergency entrance, its glow pulsing in the dusk. The car rolled into the circular drive. Ambulances idled, their lights washed out by the hospital's flood lamps. A bell above a service door jingled as they stepped out. Rashida inhaled a breath heavy with antiseptic and diesel exhaust. She trailed behind Renshaw through sliding doors into the bright, sterile chaos of the emergency bay, rubber soles squeaking on polished linoleum, the beeping of monitors, clipped orders from nurses. He led her past curtained alcoves and a bank of elevators. A sign pointed to thoracic unit, floors 4 to 7. The elevator dinged, doors opening to a narrow foyer lined with framed photographs of past benefactors in sepia tones. Renshaw touched a metal plaque at eye level, in memory of David Renshaw, Jr. His jaw tightened, but he did not hesitate. He pressed the call button for the 4th floor. The lift shot upward with a muted vibration, the hum of the motor filling the cabin. Rashida pressed her back against the wall, clutching the envelope until her knuckles whitened. When the doors parted, the quiet outside was stark. Only the distant murmur of the city below, the soft wheeze of respirators in adjoining rooms, the occasional ring of a nurse's station telephone. They traversed a corridor of pale green walls and stainless steel handrails. At room 412, a small card fluttered on the door. Mr. Cassius Clay, patient. Rashida hesitated. She remembered the fervor of her father's youth, the roar of crowds chanting, "Ali! Ali!" a far cry from this sterile hall where time seemed to drag alongside the drip of an IV. Renshaw reached for the doorknob and turned it. The hinges sighed. Inside, in the glow of a single bedside lamp, lay the man who had shaped a nation's conscience. White sheets drawn to mid-chest, a nasal cannula feeding oxygen, his face creased by lines deeper than any boxing scar. He stirred, eyelids fluttering as he recognized his daughter, hope flaring in his gaze. Rashida crossed the threshold, the heavy rustle of her shoes on tile sounding like applause to her ears. She set the envelope on the bedside table and stepped forward, heart pounding in her throat. Her father's hand, once steady as a metronome, reached out with feeble strength. She took it, her fingers slipping between his, and in that instant, the years of distance, of battles won and lost, of silence and secrets, collapsed into a moment of shared breath. No words passed between them, only the gentle squeeze of palms and the soft hiss of the oxygen machine, marking time for two people bound by blood, by history, and now, by an envelope bearing everything left unsaid. A week had passed since that quiet arrival in the corridor, and the town's pulse had subtly shifted. On a blustery Monday morning, the principal of East End School sat alone behind his desk, the daily attendance log open before him. Sunlight slanted through the Venetian blinds, carving bands of light across stacks of unfiled paperwork. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his eyes lingering on the small print of the morning paper laid atop his budget report. There, buried between the weather forecast and the classifieds, was a terse headline. Local school sees rare visit from boxing champion. No photograph, no fanfare, just the name Muhammad Ali, inked in sober type. He closed the paper with a soft snap, the wood-grain desk reverberating faintly, and exhaled. For a moment, he saw Rashida's face, the way her shoulders had tensed when the envelope slipped beneath the door. He reached for his pen, tapped it twice against the blotter, and pushed back from the desk. Across town, Coach Fletcher of the Tigers Youth Club drove home along winding residential streets. His sedan's radio crackled, tuned to WLRGAM. The announcer's voice quavered with excitement. In surprising news, boxing's own Muhammad Ali made an unpublicized appearance yesterday at East End School, meeting with the principal and specifically requesting an audience with one student. Sources say it was done quietly. No cameras, no crowds. Fletcher's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He remembered Ali as a fearless fighter in the ring, but now, news of his silent visit stirred something deeper. Pulling into his driveway, Fletcher cut the ignition and sat for a heartbeat. The smell of gasoline lingered in the car. He climbed from the vehicle and strolled toward the front door, where his wife, Marjorie, was hanging laundry on a line. The soft clack of clothespins punctuated the air. Their son, 11 years old, sat at the kitchen table under a flickering fluorescent bulb, sweat glistening on his brow as he struggled with long division. Fletcher stepped inside without a word. Marjorie looked up, mid-clip, and raised an eyebrow. Fletcher offered only a wry smile and crouched beside their son. "You're doing fine, champ," he murmured, tapping the math book. The boy glanced up, uncertain. "Dad?" he asked, voice small. "Did you hear about—" Fletcher nodded, closed the book gently, and ruffled his son's hair. "Ali's a good man," he said softly. "Sometimes you meet heroes in the most unexpected places." He stood, smoothing his jacket, and turned to Marjorie. "That boy in school, he's got a friend now." The following morning, the school corridors buzzed with subdued excitement. Students chattered in low voices, their footsteps echoing off the linoleum floors. In the third-grade classroom, Rashida arranged her books in neat stacks on her desk, her fingers brushing the edges as she tried to steady her breath. She glanced at the door as it swung open, and a boy from the second row leaned forward, eyes bright. "Your dad came, didn't he?" he whispered, voice trembling with awe. Rashida met his gaze for a moment before nodding. The entire class seemed to hold its breath. No one laughed, no one jeered. Instead, they watched as she sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Moments later, Mr. Turner, the teacher with the perpetually creased shirt and mahogany-rimmed glasses, stepped into the room. He paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the assembly of eager faces. His posture was different today, straighter, less rushed. He set his briefcase on the desk and leaned back against the wooden lectern, crossing his arms. The room fell deathly silent, the only sound the distant hum of ventilation. Mr. Turner cleared his throat, then spoke in a measured tone. "Good morning, class." His voice, usually brisk and clipped, carried warmth. He unfolded a piece of chalk from his pocket, its tip worn flat, and tapped it against the blackboard. "Today," he said, "we begin with a question." He let the silence stretch, then pointed toward Rashida. "Who here knows what it means to stand up for something, even when everyone else is quiet?" A dozen small hands rose tentatively, but Rashida was the only one to meet his eyes with a steady nod. Mr. Turner smiled, chalk in hand. "Courage," he wrote in neat letters. Then he underlined the word before turning back to the class. "Not the loudest act," he said, voice soft, "but the one that changes everything." He paused to let the words sink in, his gaze lingering on Rashida for a beat longer than necessary. And in that hushed moment, the echo of Muhammad Ali's silent presence lingered in the room, an unspoken lesson on strength, delivered not by fists, but by meaning. The hallways behind the locker rooms carried the murmur of footsteps, soft thuds on concrete, the scrape of worn shoes, and the distant hum of concession stands preparing for the night's main event. Muhammad Ali sat on a low wooden bench, his back pressed against peeling paint, gloves beside him, and towel draped over his broad shoulders. A single bare bulb cast a thin pool of yellow light, outlining the sweat on his brow and the stillness in his eyes. The air smelled of liniment and used tape, mingled with the faint trace of stale beer from last night's crowd. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the damp, heavy scent of the arena, and exhaled slowly, steadying himself for what was to come. Across the corridor, Carter Leroy strode with frenetic energy. His red satin robe rippled at each step, wrists flashing gold bracelets that caught the light like smuggled treasure. Yet his grin trembled. Behind the bravado, Ali could sense the boxer's pulse quicken whenever he glanced in a reflective surface or caught the reflection of the crowd's thousands of eyes. Carter paused before Ali's door, his gloved hand curling around the handle as if he feared it might give way. A moment later, he turned and swept aside a legion of crusted sweatbands and discarded bottles to reveal a burly promoter named Wallace Tex Malone. Malone's suit was sharp, his boots dusty, his face was carved from riveted steel, expression unreadable. He held a thin envelope in one hand, the seal already broken. Ali rose, his robe falling from the bench like dark water. He strode into the corridor, the whoosh of his footstep cutting through the distant roar of the crowd. Malone stepped forward, sliding the envelope into Ali's hand. Instead of the customary purse or promotional flyer, the card read simply, "Speak at the Carter Rights Rally, tonight. Pay, $100,000. Malone's voice was gravel. "They want you to press their cause. Politics, brother. Give 'em your name. Silence ain't enough." No cheer came from the glittering trophy cases or the lockers behind them, only a dead hush. Ali's jaw clenched as he read the note. The Carter Rights Rally, an impromptu gathering of activists demanding reform, led by the same man whose name blazed across the gloves of his opponent. In that instant, Ali saw beyond the gilded ring to the expectation that his influence would be leveraged, sold even, to the highest bidder. He folded the paper once, then twice, and slipped it back into Malone's palm. "Politics isn't my fight," he said, voice low. "I'm here for the game." His shoulders bowed, not to show submission, but the weight of regret that tugged at him now, sharper than any punch. Carter, still framed in the doorway, watched Ali with an expression that shifted from triumph to bewilderment. He mimed a question, but no words came. Ali turned, walking toward the chamber's entrance, pushing past the gauntlet of seconds and trainers who instinctively moved aside. Carter followed, trailing as if drawn by some invisible tether. In the tunnel, the distant clang of ringside bell preparations echoed. The walls were scuffed cinder block, the floor slick with sweat and chalk. A lone chain hung from the ceiling, its links swaying with a rusty creak whenever a fight broke its silence with a downshift in footsteps. As Ali stepped into the brightness of the ramp, Carter stopped. His chest rose and fell, eyes darting between Ali's determined stride and the throbbing mass of humanity beyond the curtain. Midway down the slope, an elderly security guard, once a lifelong fan, spotted Ali and offered a silent nod. Behind him, a young photographer gestured urgently, seeking to capture Ali's every step. But Ali never acknowledged them. He looked at Carter instead, then up toward the gleaming lights, as if measuring the distance between the man he faced and the world he inhabited. Just before reaching the ring apron, Ali paused. Carter closed the gap, glove brushing Ali's shoulder. In that brief contact, Ali felt the tremor of fear that underpinned Carter's swagger. A whisper reached his ears, so soft others wouldn't catch it. "This isn't my war." Carter's voice, unguarded, betrayed a sorrow deeper than any wound. Ali exhaled and, with no flourish, dropped to one knee, planted his glove in the shadowed canvas, and looked up at the lights. The hush rippled through the arena. Announcers halted mid-sentence, the crowd's roar sputtered, and cameras spun toward the still figure at center stage. Carter fell silent at the roar of truck engines in the parking lot above. Almond-bright spotlights paused as if caught in mid-blink. For one heartbeat, Ali and Carter faced each other not as gladiators, but as two men bound by expectation and fate. Without another word, Ali stood, rose fully erect, and extended his hand. Carter hesitated, gaze flickering, then took it. The gloved clasp was neither triumphant nor ornate. It was the union of two souls who had come to understand that sometimes the greatest fight was not in winning or losing, but in choosing one's own path. As the handshakes echoed in the stillness, the first crack of the bell rang out, not to begin a bout, but to mark the end of one chapter and the quiet dawn of another. The newsprint lay folded on the director's mahogany desk like a confession. He stared at the grain of the wood, its knots and cracks illuminated by the low yellow glow of a single desk lamp. Outside his window, streetlights cast long wavering shadows through the trees, and the distant rumble of a passing freight train rattled the glass. The city had always been noisy, sirens, tires squealing, the roar of engines. But tonight the silence in his office felt thicker, almost palpable. He reached forward and smoothed the crease in the newspaper. Muhammad Ali visits East End School. The headline pulsed in his mind, a heartbeat of ink on newsprint, and for the first time in years he was at a loss for words. Back home, the teacher turned the radio dial until he caught the tail end of the story. The announcer's voice, no more than static, crackled. And in local news, boxing legend Muhammad Ali made a surprise appearance at East End Elementary to check on the well-being of his daughter. The teacher's hand hovered over the knob, then settled. He leaned back in his creaking kitchen chair, and watched the reflection of the fluorescent ceiling light split across the linoleum floor. His wife chopped vegetables with methodical precision, each slice punctuating the silence. Their son tapped a pencil furiously against his notebook, filling margins with doodles. No one spoke about the surprise visitor. It didn't seem like dinner-table fare. Yet the teacher felt a swirl of old guilt rise in his chest, an echo of the mocking laugh he'd unleashed in that classroom so many days ago. The next morning, the hallways of East End Elementary buzzed with cautious excitement. Children jostled one another in clusters, whispering secrets of overnight rumors. Some said they'd glimpsed Ali's tailored suit through the entrance doors. Others insisted they saw flashing cameras under the street lamps outside. In the shadowed corners, custodians exchanged raised eyebrows and the lunch lady paused, mid-ladle, rice suspended as if it too were listening. On the wall above the drinking fountain, colorful posters announced the spelling bee, but the real event had already eclipsed any academic contest. Rashida sat at her desk, her gaze fixed on the bell tower silhouette painted on the classroom wall. She felt the classroom door open behind her before the footsteps even registered. That soft scuff of shoes on tile was enough. The teacher glanced over his shoulder and exhaled slowly. He expected anyone but the man who had leveled a baton at his daughter without a shred of consequence. The door swung wider, and Muhammad Ali entered, closing it gently behind him. In one smooth motion, he crossed the threshold, his shoulders relaxed and his stride measured, as though walking into a place he'd known all his life. The air stilled, a quiet so complete it betrayed a collective breath held by every child. Ali wore a simple cotton shirt instead of the usual glint of a ring robe, and his trousers brushed the floor with a familiar weight. He did not look around, not at the wide eyes of the students, nor at the anxious faces of the faculty who had gathered at the back. His purpose was singular. He sought only one person, Rashida. She felt his warmth before she saw his expression. He knelt beside her desk, an action both ordinary and profound. No grand gestures, no raised voice, just the soft rustle of his clothing and the shift of light as he moved. Her hand, once clenched in silent defiance, relaxed and reached out. Their fingers met in a grip that spoke of unspoken promises and shared strength. The classroom held its breath. The teacher, standing by the window, felt the walls close in. The geometry of the room reduced to the distance between Ali and his daughter. He saw something in Ali's eyes, a blend of sorrow and resolve that no amount of correctional sternness or disciplinary authority could match. Behind him, Mrs. Parsons, the secretary, peeked through the glass panel in the door. She had emerged from her desk, her stapler still warm in her hand. Upon seeing Ali, her jaw hung open for a heartbeat before she pressed a trembling finger to her lips. The corridor beyond the classroom windows filled with the low murmur of staff and a solitary knock at the door frame from the principal, completing the circle of silent witnesses. Ali stood then, and for a moment, the room felt the weight of every name he'd ever carried, heavy fabric stitched together from triumphs and sacrifices. He turned to the teacher and inclined his head ever so slightly. Their eyes locked, one pair reflecting remorse, the other compassion. Ali did not utter the word forgive, for his presence alone carried that meaning. He walked past the teacher, his movements unhurried, and paused at the door. Before stepping out, he carried Rashida's gaze with him and offered a small, serene smile. As the door clicked shut behind him, the teacher exhaled and sank into his chair. Rashida's hand lingered on her desk, the space where Ali had been warm as summer sun. Outside, footsteps faded down the linoleum hallway, merging with the echo of distant children's laughter. The lesson of the day unfolded not in textbooks or chalk dust, but in the quiet courage of a girl and the fathomless patience of a father. And somewhere, in that gentle convergence of lives, a whisper of redemption wove itself into the silent history of that classroom, an unannounced chapter that would outlast any headline, any scrawl of chalk on slate.